if this message found you at the exact moment you needed to hear it. Because what if the exhaustion you feel right now is not a sign that you are breaking, but a sign that something inside you is finally shifting? What if the reason everything feels heavier, the reason your prayers feel quieter, the reason your strength feels stretched beyond its limit is because you are standing closer to breakthrough than you realize? Most people quit here, not because they failed, but because they mistake transformation for collapse. They think the pressure means they are abandoned. They think the silence means nothing is happening. They think reaching their limit means the story is over. But chosen one, there is a pattern few people understand. The greatest shifts often happen after the greatest stretching. The breakthrough often comes when you think you have nothing left. And if you've been asking, why now? Why is this season so difficult? Why does it feel like everything is changing? Stay until the end, because what you're experiencing may not be the end of your journey. It may be the beginning of the sudden shift that changes everything. Because before the shift becomes visible, there is usually a moment almost nobody prepares for. The moment where you believe you cannot take another step. The moment where your strength feels finished. The moment where everything inside you asks, can I really keep going? And that brings us here, to the place where many people misunderstand what is actually happening. When you think you cannot go further, there is a moment that almost nobody talks about, not because it is rare, but because nearly everyone misunderstands it. It is the moment right before change, the moment when you have given everything, when your prayers feel quieter, when your energy feels lower, when your hope feels stretched thinner than ever before. The moment where you stop asking for more and start asking whether you have anything left. You look around your life and wonder, why does it feel harder now than when I first started? You expected progress to feel victorious. You expected growth to feel inspiring. You expected that becoming stronger would feel powerful. Instead, it feels exhausting. Because nobody tells you that some of the most important seasons of your life do not feel like acceleration. They feel like resistance. And maybe lately, you have secretly wondered if you missed something. Maybe you thought that if God was moving in your life, things would become easier. Maybe you expected more signs, more certainty, more visible confirmation. Maybe you believed that if you were on the right path, you would feel more confident by now. But instead, you feel stretched, questioning, tired. And part of you wonders, if I am growing, why does it feel like I'm losing strength? Chosen one. What if the opposite is often true? What if the greatest shifts arrive after the greatest stretching? What if the pressure is not proof something is wrong, but proof that something is changing? Think about seeds. Before they become visible, they break. No one celebrates the moment a seed disappears beneath the soil. Nobody looks underground and says, look how successful it is becoming. From the outside, it looks buried, it looks forgotten, it looks inactive. But hidden beneath the surface, everything is happening. The shell begins separating. The old form begins disappearing. Something new begins pushing through. And before growth appears, there is rupture. Think about gold. Before it shines, it enters fire. The fire does not destroy the gold. It reveals what was always there. The heat removes what cannot remain. And sometimes life feels hot, not because you are being punished, but because something unnecessary is being removed. Think about people throughout Scripture. The pattern appears again and again. Pressure before promotion, silence before revelation, waiting before movement, preparation before calling, the wilderness before purpose. There are seasons where it looks like nothing is happening, while everything important is being formed. And maybe what you are experiencing right now is not evidence that life is closing. Maybe it is evidence that something inside you is opening. Because there comes a point in transformation where your old identity cannot carry your future. The version of you that survived cannot always become the version of you that will lead. The habits that protected you cannot always guide you. The mindset that got you here cannot always take you further. And that transition feels uncomfortable. Psychologically, this is true. Before people experience major internal growth, they often encounter resistance. The mind wants familiarity. The spirit calls for expansion. One part of you wants safety, another part wants meaning. One part wants certainty, another part knows growth requires trust. One part wants to go back, another part quietly knows you cannot return to who you used to be. That tension feels like breaking. You begin questioning things. Your old routines stop satisfying you. Your old goals feel smaller. Your old identity feels tight. You become uncomfortable in places you once belonged, and because it feels unfamiliar, you think something is wrong. But sometimes, breaking is actually becoming. Chosen one. You have survived seasons that should have ended you. You have endured confusion, disappointment, delay, silent battles, invisible grief, moments where nobody understood your internal battle, moments where you smiled publicly, while privately wondering how much longer you could carry everything. And somehow, you are still here. That matters. Because people underestimate what endurance does. Endurance changes the architecture of the soul. It teaches you to remain when emotions disappear. It teaches you to continue when evidence is absent. It teaches you to stop measuring progress only by visible results. It teaches you that consistency can become stronger than intensity. And eventually, something begins changing underneath the surface, not around you, inside you. Your standards change, your perspective changes, your relationship with fear changes. Your relationship with waiting changes, your need for approval changes, your understanding of timing changes. You become quieter but stronger, softer but more grounded, less reactive but more intentional. And one day, you wake up and realize you are no longer asking for rescue. You are becoming someone who can carry what you once prayed for. Chosen one. What if this exhaustion is not the end? What if this is the edge? What if the moment you feel least capable is the exact place where the shift begins? Stay with me, because there is something powerful about reaching your limit, and there is something even more powerful about understanding why limits exist in the first place. Because perhaps reaching your limit was never meant to destroy you. Perhaps it was meant to reveal something hidden, something necessary, something that could only be discovered when you finally reached the edge of yourself. And that brings us to the question almost nobody asks. What if your limit has a purpose? What if there is something hidden inside this season that you have not seen yet? The hidden purpose of reaching your limit. Chosen one. Nobody likes limits. We want strength, momentum, answers, control. We want movement that we can measure, progress that we can see, doors that open quickly, certainty that tells us we are safe. We want reassurance that all of our effort means something. We want to feel like if we do the right things, everything will unfold according to our expectations. But life does not always grow that way. And there is something sacred about reaching the edge of yourself, not because suffering itself is sacred, but because limits reveal things success cannot. When everything is working, you do not always know what you trust. When every plan succeeds, you do not always know where your confidence truly lives. When every prayer feels immediately answered, you do not always discover the deeper parts of your faith. But when things become uncertain, truth becomes visible. Not comfortable truth, not convenient truth, real truth. Your limit reveals your attachments, your expectations, your hidden fears, your deepest beliefs. Your limit reveals where your peace actually comes from. It reveals whether your identity was rooted in purpose or in performance, whether your confidence was rooted in faith or in outcomes, whether your hope was rooted in trust or in timelines. And that revelation can feel painful, because suddenly you begin seeing things you never noticed before. You discover that some of your confidence was built on outcomes. You felt secure when things were working, but uncertain when they were not. Some of your peace depended on certainty. You felt calm when you knew what was coming, but anxious when life became unclear. Some of your identity depended on being needed, admired, productive, ahead, strong, useful. And when those things shifted, you did not just feel disappointed, you felt lost. Then life removes those supports, and suddenly you meet yourself. Not the version you perform, not the version that knows what to say, not the version people expect, the version you actually are, the version beneath achievement, the version beneath appearance, the version beneath roles and expectations. And meeting yourself can feel uncomfortable, because there are parts of you that survival created, but purpose cannot carry. There are fears that once protected you, but now limit you. There are habits that once kept you safe, but now keep you small. There are identities that once helped you survive, but now prevent you from expanding. This is where many people turn back. Because self-discovery sounds beautiful until it asks for change, until it asks for release, until it asks for honesty. But chosen one, this is where transformation begins, not when everything becomes easier, but when everything becomes clearer. Because clarity often comes before change. There is a pattern throughout Scripture. Water did not divide before people stepped. Walls did not fall before people marched. Provision often appeared after movement. Breakthrough rarely arrived before surrender, and surrender is misunderstood. People think surrender means weakness. They think surrender means giving up. But surrender is not quitting. Surrender is releasing the illusion that control creates peace, because control promises certainty, but rarely delivers peace. Peace comes from alignment, not certainty. Peace comes from trusting even when outcomes remain unclear. And perhaps this is why you feel tired, because maybe you have been carrying things that were never yours to carry. Trying to predict every outcome, trying to force timing, trying to prevent disappointment, trying to keep every door open, trying to hold together things already changing, trying to become everything for everyone, trying to earn what was never meant to be earned. No wonder your soul feels heavy. No wonder your mind feels crowded. No wonder rest feels difficult. You were never designed to control everything, only to remain faithful inside what you can control. And sometimes, reaching your absolute limit is heaven's way of showing you something important. You cannot enter the next season as the same person. You need lighter hands, clearer vision, greater trust, different priorities, a deeper foundation. Because where you are going, your old coping mechanisms will not work. Your old identity cannot survive there. Your need to control cannot survive there. Your need for constant proof cannot survive there. Your dependence on outcomes cannot survive there. So something must be released, not because you are losing, because you are preparing, not because life is punishing you, because life is uncovering you. Chosen one, you are not weak for feeling stretched. You are expanding. And expansion always feels unfamiliar. But here's what few people realize. Before expansion becomes visible, something else often happens first. Something uncomfortable. Something that looks wrong before it reveals its purpose. Because when old identities can no longer hold, when old structures stop working, when old expectations begin falling apart, it can feel like everything is collapsing. And that is where many people become afraid, because they mistake collapse for failure. But what if collapse is not always destruction? What if collapse is sometimes preparation? What if the thing falling apart is the exact thing that cannot go where you are going? And that brings us to the next revelation, the collapse before the breakthrough. There is something unsettling about collapse, not because collapse always destroys us, but because collapse removes certainty. And certainty has a way of making us feel safe. So when something begins falling apart, we immediately assume something has gone wrong. Plans collapse, expectations collapse, timelines collapse, relationships shift, motivation changes, doors close, old dreams lose their grip. And when it happens, it feels personal. You begin asking questions you never expected to ask. What did I do wrong? Why now? Why after everything I invested? Why does it feel like things are moving backward? And maybe that is where you are right now, standing in a season that does not look like what you imagined, watching parts of life become unfamiliar, feeling things shift that you thought would remain, And because it hurts, you assume collapse means failure. But chosen one, not every collapse is destruction. Some collapses are exposure. Life reveals what cannot support your future. Life reveals where your foundation became dependent on things that were never meant to carry your identity. Life reveals what looked strong, but was built from pressure instead of peace. You may have called it failure, but perhaps it was mercy. Because sometimes the most loving thing life can do is refuse to allow you to keep building something that cannot hold you later. Imagine building higher and higher on a cracked foundation. At first, everything looks successful. From the outside, people admire the structure. The progress appears real. The growth appears impressive. But underneath, small fractures remain ignored. And eventually, height exposes weakness. The greater the weight, the more visible the instability becomes. So before elevation, there is reinforcement. Before increase, there is reconstruction. Before expansion, there is strengthening. And reconstruction rarely feels exciting because reconstruction requires interruption. It asks you to stop, to reassess, to question, to release, to rebuild. This is why some seasons feel confusing. You thought you were moving forward, but life slowed down. Doors closed, energy shifted, people disappeared, old routines stopped working, old dreams became quiet. Things that once felt clear suddenly became uncertain. And suddenly, you are standing in unfamiliar silence, a silence that feels uncomfortable, a silence that makes you question whether anything is happening, a silence that feels empty. But chosen one, silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is construction. There are things being formed inside you that noise could never create, because noise can distract, but silence reveals. Silence shows you where your identity has been attached. Silence reveals what you avoid. Silence uncovers what activity once covered. And inside that quiet place, something deeper begins forming. Patience, discernment, depth, inner stability, emotional maturity, clearer priorities, stronger boundaries, a quieter confidence, a faith that does not disappear when circumstances become uncertain. And these qualities do not appear instantly. They are formed slowly, quietly, often invisibly, day after day, moment after moment, not through dramatic events, but through ordinary endurance, through showing up, through remaining, through continuing even when progress feels invisible, until one day you realize something unexpected. Your reactions have changed. Things that once controlled you no longer do. You do not panic as quickly. You do not chase as quickly. You do not fear delays the way you once did. You stop trying to force everything. You stop needing constant proof. You stop fighting every closed door. Your priorities have changed. Your perspective has changed. Your relationship with uncertainty has changed. And suddenly, you realize something. The external situation may not have changed yet, but you have. That is breakthrough. Not because circumstances changed first, but because you did. Because real breakthrough often begins internally before it appears externally. And when internal breakthrough happens, external shifts often follow, not always immediately, not always dramatically, but often suddenly. Because there is something mysterious about preparation. For a long time, it looks like nothing is moving. Then, unexpectedly, everything begins changing. Doors open, clarity arrives, timing aligns. What felt delayed begins unfolding, and people call it sudden. But they never saw the hidden reconstruction. They never saw the quiet preparation. They never saw the internal transformation. Stay with the process. You are closer than you think. Because sometimes, the most significant movement happens when it looks like nothing is happening. And often, the greatest breakthroughs do not arrive at the beginning of the struggle. They arrive at what feels like the final moment, the final stretch, the final surrender, the final hour. And that leads us to the next revelation. Why heaven often moves in the final hour. Have you noticed something strange? Sometimes nothing seems to happen. Days pass, weeks pass, months pass. You pray, you reflect, You keep showing up, you keep trying. And yet, from the outside, it feels like nothing is moving. Then suddenly, everything changes. A conversation, an opportunity, a realization, a connection, a new perspective, a closed door that unexpectedly becomes the right redirection, a moment of clarity, a door. And what took years appears to move in moments. People call it sudden. They look at the outcome and say, that happened so fast. That breakthrough appeared overnight. That opportunity came out of nowhere. But what people call sudden is often the visible result of something invisible. Because sudden shifts are usually built in hidden places. Long before the moment becomes visible, something has been developing. There were lessons, corrections, preparations, invisible victories, quiet obedience, difficult decisions nobody noticed, days you kept going without motivation, moments you chose peace over panic, moments you remained faithful without evidence, moments you rested instead of forcing, moments you released things that no longer aligned, things nobody applauded, things nobody rewarded, things nobody even knew were happening. Yet, all of it mattered. Because transformation accumulates, even when results seem absent. Growth does not always announce itself. Most of the deepest changes happen quietly. And that can be difficult to trust, because people naturally want visible progress. We want signs, movement, confirmation, evidence. But some of life's greatest developments happen beneath the surface. Think about roots. You do not see them growing, yet they determine how much weight the tree can eventually carry. Think about foundations. Nobody celebrates them, yet they determine what remains standing later. Think about preparation. It rarely feels exciting while it is happening. But later, you realize preparation was protecting you. The final hour is difficult because it feels unfair. You think, if change was coming, why wait this long? If the answer existed, why all this silence? If the breakthrough was real, why did it feel impossible? And those questions are understandable, because waiting has a way of making people believe they are forgotten. Delay can make people question timing. Silence can make people question direction. But perhaps delay was not punishment. Perhaps delay was preparation. Perhaps things were not being withheld. Perhaps they were being developed. Because timing is not only about receiving, timing is also about becoming. You are becoming able to sustain what arrives. You are becoming emotionally stronger, more discerning, more stable, less dependent on validation, less controlled by urgency, more capable of carrying what once would have overwhelmed you. Because receiving something too early can become another burden. Think about this. Sometimes the thing you are asking for requires a version of you that does not fully exist yet. Not because you are lacking, but because growth is still happening. And if it arrived too soon, you might protect it from fear, lose it from pressure, or misunderstand it completely. So hidden seasons are not always empty seasons. Sometimes hidden seasons are training seasons, formation seasons, strengthening seasons, identity seasons. And while they feel slow, they are often sacred. Chosen one, your season may not be delayed, it may be developing, and development always feels slower than desire, because desire wants immediate arrival. Development prepares long-term endurance. Desire wants movement now. Development asks, can you sustain what you are asking for? And one day, the thing you thought was delay will reveal itself as preparation. You will look back and realize the waiting changed you. The silence matured you. The uncertainty strengthened you. The hidden season protected you. And when the shift comes, you will realize something. You needed the hidden season. Not because it was easy, but because it made you ready. But here is the surprising part. When preparation reaches completion, the shift does not always announce itself dramatically. It often begins quietly, subtly, internally. Before circumstances change, something inside you changes first. Your thoughts shift, your reactions shift, your desires shift, your peace shifts. And if you are paying attention, you may discover something unexpected. The shift you have been waiting for may not be coming. It may have already started. And that brings us to the next revelation. The signs. The shift has already started. Chosen one. The shift does not always begin outside. Sometimes it begins in ways you almost miss, not with dramatic announcements, not with immediate results, not with visible success, not with sudden answers. Sometimes the shift arrives quietly, so quietly, that at first you think nothing is happening. You keep waiting for life to look different, while not realizing you are already becoming different. Because some of the most important transformations do not begin in circumstances. They begin in consciousness, perspective, identity, the invisible places. And because those changes cannot always be measured, people often overlook them. They continue asking, when will things change? Without realizing change has already started. Chosen one. Pay attention, because the signs are often smaller than expected. You stop needing validation. You still appreciate encouragement, but you no longer depend on it. You stop needing everyone to understand your journey. You stop explaining every decision. You stop proving your value. You stop measuring yourself through other people's approval. And that shift is deeper than it looks. Because when approval loses power, freedom begins. You become calmer, not because life became easier, but because your inner world became stronger. Things that once created panic now create reflection. Things that once felt urgent now feel temporary. You begin responding instead of reacting. You become less controlled by emotions and more guided by wisdom. You feel less urgency. You no longer feel pressure to force outcomes. You stop believing every opportunity must be chased. You stop believing every closed door means rejection. You begin understanding that timing matters. You become patient with process, patient with growth, patient with yourself. And patience is often one of the earliest signs that internal breakthrough has begun. You stop chasing. You stop chasing validation. You stop chasing people. You stop chasing timelines. You stop chasing versions of yourself that no longer fit. Because something inside you begins understanding. What belongs in your life does not always require exhausting pursuit. You stop explaining yourself, not from pride, but from peace. You realize not everyone is meant to understand your process. Not everyone can see what is still forming, and that no longer disturbs you. You become more intentional. You begin choosing differently, protecting your energy differently, speaking differently, resting differently, thinking differently. You become more aware of what drains you, more aware of what strengthens you, more aware of what truly matters. And then something surprising happens. You notice peace where panic used to live. Places that once triggered fear begin creating clarity. Situations that once overwhelmed you begin revealing strength. Questions that once demanded immediate answers become easier to carry. And at first, you may not even recognize it. Because growth often feels ordinary while it is happening. But look closer. You recover faster. You trust more deeply. You compare less. You breathe more. You become softer with yourself, more grounded, more present. That is movement. That is growth. That is evidence. You may think nothing is happening, but your inner world is changing. And inner change always becomes visible eventually. Because external breakthroughs often follow internal shifts. The things you are becoming today prepare what you will carry tomorrow. So do not dismiss small changes. Do not underestimate quieter victories. Do not ignore invisible progress, because hidden transformation eventually becomes visible reality. Pay attention. You may already be crossing into your next season. You may already be becoming the version of yourself that once felt impossible. But there is something important to understand. Even after the shift begins, there can still be difficult days. There can still be moments where emotions disappear, moments where energy feels low, moments where growth feels invisible again. And this confuses people, because they think, if change is happening, why do I still feel empty sometimes? But emptiness does not always mean nothing is happening. Sometimes emptiness appears right before deeper strength is revealed. Sometimes growth continues even when feelings become quiet. And that brings us to the next revelation. Chapter 6, holding on when you feel empty. There is a sacred kind of perseverance, not loud, not dramatic, not the kind people celebrate, not the kind that gets noticed, quiet, steady, deep, the kind that happens behind closed doors, the kind that nobody applauds, the kind that keeps showing up even when emotions become quiet, the kind that continues even when visible progress disappears, the kind that says, "I do not understand everything, but I will remain." And maybe this chapter is for the version of you that feels tired, not defeated, just tired. The version of you that has kept believing, kept trying, kept praying, kept carrying responsibilities, kept showing strength, and now quietly wonders, how much longer? Because there's a difference between giving up and simply feeling empty, and many people confuse the two. Chosen one. Feeling empty does not always mean you are losing faith. Sometimes it means you have been carrying too much for too long. Sometimes it means growth has demanded more from you than expected. Sometimes it means old parts of you are being released. Sometimes it means your soul is asking for rest. There are seasons where transformation feels exciting, and there are seasons where transformation feels quiet, hidden, ordinary. There are seasons where every day feels meaningful, and there are seasons where faith feels simple, not dramatic. Just one more day, one more prayer, one more choice to continue. And those seasons matter more than most people realize, because character is rarely built in emotional highs. It is often built in ordinary persistence. Sometimes strength is simply refusing to abandon yourself, refusing to stop believing, refusing to let temporary pain define permanent identity, refusing to let disappointment become your identity, refusing to let uncertainty become your future, refusing to interpret exhaustion as failure. Because tired and finished are not the same thing. Empty and broken are not the same thing. Slow and lost are not the same thing. You are allowed to feel tired. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to breathe. You are allowed to admit that this season has stretched you. You are allowed to acknowledge that you do not have all the answers. You are allowed to rest. But do not mistake fatigue for failure. Do not confuse quiet seasons with abandoned seasons. Do not assume that because you cannot feel movement, movement is absent. Because some of the deepest changes happen below awareness. The soul grows differently than ambition. Ambition wants speed. The soul values depth. Ambition measures achievement. The soul measures alignment. Ambition asks, how quickly can I arrive? The soul asks, who am I becoming? And soul growth often happens slowly, deeply, and invisibly. Not through dramatic moments, but through ordinary days, through staying, through trusting, through learning to remain present, through learning that worth is not created by constant performance. Chosen one, you are not behind, you are becoming. You are becoming more resilient, more grounded, more patient, more aware, more capable of carrying things that once overwhelmed you. Even now, while you feel uncertain, something inside you is strengthening. You may not see it, you may not fully feel it, but change is not always emotional. Sometimes transformation happens quietly, and this is where many people stop. Not because they lack ability, but because they become discouraged by the silence. They think, if something important was happening, surely I would feel more. But some of the most meaningful seasons feel ordinary while you live them. Keep showing up. Keep listening. Keep trusting. Keep remaining open. Keep allowing yourself to grow, not because everything feels certain, but because something greater may already be unfolding. And maybe this is the part nobody tells you. Sometimes right after the emptiest season comes the clearest movement. Sometimes after the longest waiting comes the fastest change. Sometimes after feeling like nothing is happening, you suddenly realize everything has been preparing. And the reason the final stretch feels so difficult is because you are closer than you think. Because there comes a moment after all the waiting, after all the stretching, after all the quiet preparation, when what has been developing internally finally becomes visible externally, not gradually, not always predictably, but suddenly. And that brings us to the final revelation. The sudden shift. If there is one thing I want you to leave with today, it is this. Your greatest breakthrough does not always arrive when you feel strongest. Sometimes it arrives when you feel emptied, not because struggle creates miracles, but because reaching your limit changes you. When you reach the end of your own strength, you stop depending only on what you can control. When old identities stop working, you become open to deeper growth. When certainty disappears, you begin discovering who you really are. And that is the shift. The shift is not that life suddenly becomes perfect. The shift is that you become different. You become able to carry what once would have crushed you. You become able to receive what once would have overwhelmed you. You become able to walk into what you once prayed for. That is why the greatest breakthrough often happens at your absolute limit. Because your limit was never the destination. It was the transition, not the ending. The preparation, not punishment. Formation, not abandonment. Development. You thought you were reaching the end, but you were reaching the point where the old version of you could go no further, so the new version could begin. And one day, you will look back at this season and realize nothing was wasted. Not the waiting, not the silence, not the exhaustion, not the stretching, not the hidden seasons. All of it was building capacity. All of it was preparing the shift. So if you feel tired, do not assume you are finished. If you feel stretched, do not assume you are failing. If you feel like you have reached your absolute limit, do not assume the story is ending. Because sometimes, the moment you think you cannot go any further becomes the exact moment everything begins changing. That is the sudden shift. Why your greatest breakthrough often happens when you've reached your absolute limit.